who don't have any frame of reference for anything that's going on.
Yeah, you say smooth brains, I say transcended and enlightened brains. Because what the hell does all of this information do for anybody? What is knowing this stuff? How does it help?
Well, gets you out of jury duty.
They are right.
Yes,
they are
that's
right.
the one thing it does.
But it gets you out of jury duties for what? So you could read more fucking articles? Like, okay. So, we've seen a lot of this shit where people are like, go to trade school. You'll make a lot of money. Well, I mean, they're just, look, if everyone you're telling goes to trade school, I got bad news for you about how much money all those jobs are going to make. But one job that is going to make a lot in the future, no matter how many, because most people can't do it, most people won't do it, is you can be someone who you are a professional juror. You've never read an article, you don't know fucking anything, you don't know how to open Twitter. You have to call your building superintendent to turn on the oven every day. You're not allowed to just operate it on your own. And your job is that you serve in different juries, because too many Americans in major cities spend 18 hours a day looking at their phone and getting mad and reading articles. Mm-hmm. They can't be on juries.
No. We need a class of people who are just essentially kept in veal crates watching reruns of The Office.
Yes.
Like, oh, that Michael Scott. He's like my dad.
That will be like the only job with social mobility. That's the only way that you can become PMC is by being a professional juror, if you're not already. But then, unfortunately, your kids will be article readers.
I know, yeah. I mean, we're back to the fucked drip cycle. But no, it's like like the people who want to be history's actors the most, the people who who want to be one of the 12 angry men. They don't get the opportunity to because they know too much. They know too much, so they by being moderately aware or having opinions about current events, they prejudice themselves before a lawyer even gets a chance to do so for them, which is dangerous. So I mean, like, I just worry though, because I mean, obviously, it's hard if you want to see justice done in this case, and obviously that would mean Ghislaine being totally exonerated. To get on the jury and do that, But you know what? Let's read the article more, because I think it's painting a picture. So it says here, Cheryl Bader, a former federal prosecutor who now teaches at Fordham Law School, said such a defense could work with some jurors, referring to the idea that she was a sort of enthrall and a scapegoat to a rich and powerful man. People hold complex worldviews, said Bader. A Me Too juror seems more likely to want to hold Maxwell accountable for her enabling role. But they might also be open to seeing Maxwell as herself a victim of a controlling, abusive male. I think it will come down to how well the defense can cast Maxwell as just another victim of Jeffrey Epstein. I'm going to be watching the trial to see how well the defense can make that case.
I honestly don't know what the fuck to expect from this trial. I have no idea. I would move to think that whatever fix could be in is probably already in. I do think it's interesting. Did you guys see that list of like fake Maxwell co-defendants for the criminal trial go around?
Oh yeah. And it was like, just like Jay-Z and Kanye West were on it or something.
Yeah. So there was someone, I feel like that's because now this is like out of, even though this is a federal trial going on that should be pretty high profile, I don't feel like it's going to be covered with the same breathlessness that Epstein was covered, 3 years ago and 2 years ago. But I do think that like the move, now that it isn't in the public eye as much, the move will be people like that will just like, you'll have like a fake list of co-defendants where you're like, oh, actually, like she's on trial with like Jay-Z and like Chrissy Teigen. And like all the people, like if you're like an online, like if you're sort of a QAnon adjacent person, it'll be perfect for you.
Because there'll be just such a wealth of spurious, but nonetheless tantalizing details to keep you sort of spinning at all times. I do like this idea.
And it's the perfect zone flooding too, because it's like I'm sure, like as we know, there are like actual celebrities in the flight logs and in the books, but like it keeps you from looking at people like Glenn Dubin or like Leon Black, like huge finance titans, and people like Bill Barr's dad. it will keep you from looking at someone like that. If you're like, oh, when are they going to call Jay-Z to the stand?
Well, I mean,
if there aren't that many people posting about it or talking about it, but half the people think that Jay-Z or like Meek Mill are co-defendants, that's perfect for them.
Well, I mean, I mean, I think you can see it starting a little bit already in the way this article is framed, which is in the context of like this is now like this is a Me Too trial, and how will like in the post Me Too era, how will jurors react to like a female sex criminal or a female sex victim? And it's just like I don't think that's a really despite the fact that this case does involve sex abuse, and I mean, yeah, like is that really the way? Is that really what's being adjudicated at this trial here? Because it's like I'd be interested to see how her defense is going to swing this idea that she was enthralled to Jeffrey Epstein or a victim, just like many of the people, the people she's being prosecuted on behalf of. Because it was like, she's just like, I just want to make it clear here. Enslaving teenagers for the purposes of blackmail scheme is totally not my bag, baby. I would turn the jurors' attention to Exhibit A. Enslaving teenagers for the purposes of blackmail totally is my bag, baby. Written by Ghislaine Maxwell.
No, yeah, they're going to try something called the Smithers defense.
How does the Smithers defense work?
It'll be like the lawyers who are getting paid like $7 million in slush funds from this trial are just going to be like, this bitch like Smithers. Jeffrey Epstein was Mr. Burns. I rest my case. And then they'll be like, oh, there's a gas leak in the courtroom. Mistrial. Jay-Z was indicted.
It says here, there has been a societal shift now, and I think often men may view certain witnesses as people who could have been their sisters, their daughters, their friends, she said. And so I haven't seen such a sharp division between how men react to victims of sexual violence versus women. Potential jurors were also quizzed about possible biases against wealthy people leading lives of luxury. Maxwell, an Oxford-educated daughter of British publishing tycoon Robert Maxwell, has an estimated net worth of about $22.5 million, and testimony will likely include accounts of how she managed Epstein's 5 homes, including a private island in the Caribbean. Before she was arrested in July 2020, she had been hiding out for a year in a $1 million rural New Hampshire country house that was paid for in cash. A major issue in all high-profile trials is how much media jurors may have consumed about the case. Since his death, Epstein has been the subject of a flood of news articles, podcasts, and the 4-part Netflix documentary Filthy Rich, which included interviews with victims who said Maxwell recruited young girls for him. Her defense team has long questioned whether she can get a fair trial given the cloud of massive negative publicity that surrounds the case, and potential jurors were questioned about their knowledge of Epstein and Maxwell. One man who said he had once briefly met Epstein was excused after he said the meeting led him to follow the case more than he would have. That man's name, Chris Tucker.
That is like, are we ever going to get to the bottom of that?
No.
I feel like that is like, that's the weirdest thing about the entire Epstein thing. Like everything else is like awful and sordid and insane. But it is like, it's like, you know what it is, right? It's like a Craig Spence type thing. Oh, this guy was running like an international blackmail thing at the behest of intelligence agencies. But like, in an ideal society, there would be like a church committee where you figure out how Chris Tucker was there. Like what's going on here?
I mean, I think you're right. I mean, not so much about Chris Tucker, but like the church committee like model is that like in addition to this trial, which is like, look, her legal defense is entitled to make any argument that they think will work. But like, like I said earlier, about like framing this as an issue of like, oh, like a post Me Too case, when it's like the ramifications of this case are not about, I mean, they are about in terms of like the people who have been victimized by these two people, but like there are much larger implications about, like you said, like his connections to the heights of finance, tech, media, and most importantly, the intelligence community that, that like a trial of this nature like won't get to the bottom of, but like has there been any hearings in Congress on like on this matter whatsoever?
One of the epic senators, John Kennedy from Louisiana, he's like a Benny Johnson type senator. He like said something about Jeffrey Epstein not killing himself in like an unrelated hearing or something, and then of course like nothing, no one held any hearings or anything, nor will they. I mean, if during the R. Kelly case, it had come out that during the original the original trial in Chicago all those years ago for the tape with that girl, if it had turned out like the prosecutor or the judge in that case had been like, oh, I had orders like not to pursue it that much because like a guy higher up at DOJ was a fan, you would have heard about that. But Acosta being like, intelligence told me he's off limits, that just nothing. Even in this coverage, we don't hear about that. That was just an aside. That was an aside that we've never gone back to, and there will not be hearings about it because, again, like this isn't, people aren't talking or thinking about this in the same way that they were 3 years ago, which is pretty favorable for them.
Yeah.
And they're able to flood the zone with like just complete fucking bullshit.
Yeah.
With the remaining people who are talking about it.
And just like like I said, the way this article is presented about like, oh, like, you know, could it possibly be that jurors will think she's the victim too? Like left unsaid being like, you know, the implication that like, oh, like maybe she is a victim. And the fact that this is in Bloomberg opinion. Bloomberg, the media outlet named for Michael Bloomberg, who is featured in at least 30 photos with Ghislaine Maxwell at various parties and social functions.
Yeah. But I mean, that's been like all over the coverage. Like, do you remember like Vicky Ward, who wrote like the Daily Beast article that people like attribute with like kicking a lot of the shit off? Like, didn't she like fucking hang out with Ghislaine? they were like, oh, everyone knows her.
But yeah, like I just think it is curious, the way this Bloomberg article seems to be framing the case as the trial actually begins. But to move on from that, I would like to take some time now to look into like in terms of the way this case is being framed. So the trial started today, and last week, the New York Times wrote a big article based on newly released records. Headline: Epstein's final days, celebrity reminiscing and a running toilet. The point of the article is to be that like they looked at the case again, and based on new documents, they can say again that he definitely did kill himself. And, you know, obviously the timing of this is quite obvious. But nonetheless, this is a very interesting article, both for what it does say and what it doesn't say. And I think it's I know I alluded to it on last week's episode, but there's a lot here that I think is worth going into. So this is a big splashy piece in the New York Times. Newly released records show the financier living a mundane existence in jail before his suicide, while also spinning deceptions until the very end. The deception here that he is spinning seems to be that he was murdered, like that he killed himself, but in doing so, he was like continued to perpetrate this world of deception and illusions that he catered to and was a part of.
He was doing like an epic prank, basically.
Yeah, it says here. The article begins. The financier, jailed in Manhattan on federal sex trafficking charges involving teenage girls, was found unconscious on the floor of his cell one morning in July 2019, a strip of bedsheet tied around his bruised neck. In the hours and days that followed the suicide attempt, Jeffrey Epstein would claim to be living a wonderful life, denying any thoughts of ending it, even as he sat on suicide watch and faced daunting legal troubles. I have no interest in killing myself, Mr. Epstein told a jailhouse psychologist, according to Bureau of Prisons documents that have not been previously made public. He was, a quote, a coward and did not like pain, he explained. I would not do that to myself. But 2 weeks later, he did just that. He died in his cell on August 10th in the Metropolitan Correction Center, having hanged himself with a bedsheet, the medical examiner ruled. After a life of manipulation, Mr. Epstein created illusions until the very end, deceiving correctional officers, counselors, and specifically trained inmates assigned to monitor him around the clock, according to the documents, among more than 2,000 pages of Federal Bureau of Prisons records obtained by the New York Times after filing a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit. The detailed notes and reports compiled by those who interacted with Mr. Epstein during his 36 days of detention show how he repeatedly assured them he had much to live for, while also hinting that he was increasingly despondent. The clues prompted too little action by jail and bureau officials who made mistake after mistake leading up to Mr. Epstein's death, the records reveal. He says he passed many days closed in a conference room with his lawyers, avoiding the confines of his dank and dirty cell. In conversations with psychologists and other inmates, he spoke of his interest in physics and mathematics and offered tidbits of investment advice. He reminisced about socializing with celebrities, even as he complained about the running toilet in his cell, the orange prison garb, his difficulty sleeping, his dehydration, and a numbness in his right arm. I just like he, even in prison, he's still trying to recruit people for the various scams and it's like various like money shenanigans that he was up to, and doing it by being like, oh, you should definitely consider investing with me. I know Kevin Spacey. I've hung out with him.
Prison has to be like, I mean, no one wants to go to prison, but for like a middle-aged guy, it's kind of like, it's said that like Biden actually loves it when bad things happen to him because he's Catholic. Like that's the Catholic thing. I think for a guy like a jail, like there's a lot to complain about.
You can complain nonstop. You can natter at people and they can't go anywhere.
Yeah. My bed's small.
The food is terrible in such small portions.
There's a breeze. And you'd be right. There would be. That's why I really don't believe that. When I'm elected as senator from New York and do finally hold these hearings, I'll be like, he wouldn't have killed himself because a guy that age would love jail. There's so much he could have whined about.
I mean,
it's okay. I'm that age now. I'm 60 when I get elected.
Going on here, it says, the newly obtained records offer no support to the explosion of conspiracy theories that Mr. Epstein's death was not a suicide. They also shed no light on questions raised by his brother and one of his lawyers that he might have been assisted in killing himself. But they do paint a picture of incompetence and sloppiness by some within the Bureau of Prisons, which runs the Federal Detention Center. An intake screening form erroneously described Mr. Epstein as a black male, and then in parentheses, he was white, and indicated that he had no prior sex offense convictions, even though he was a registered sex offender with 2008 convictions in Florida for solicitation of prostitution, and procurement of minors to engage in prostitution. A few social phone calls were not recorded, logged, or monitored. Records show an apparent violation of jail policy. So I mean, just that paragraph alone, right there, is very telling. And I understand the people that are writing this, like they set it up to be like, there's been no evidence that he killed himself. But what there is evidence of is a ton of bungles on behalf of the Bureau of Prisons. And I just got to say, I mean, one of these things would be pretty ridiculous. I mean, entering him into the system as a black man is pretty fucking funny. It's almost like they were sort of trying to lose track of him. And then logging him into prison as someone without any prior sex offenses, also a bit strange. And then the fact that his phone calls were not being recorded or monitored on a number of occasions, I got to say, one of these Mongols, okay, understandable. Two, okay, that's something smells funny. But like all three of those, like I said, the details in this story, I think, are telling in a way. It's like that was someone who wrote this article like trying to make the opposite case. Because, like, I think that there's a number of these telling details in here. Like the fact that he kept telling his psychologist, quote, I have no interest in killing myself over and over again.
Yeah, the phone calls one is the one that sticks out the most to me. Because it's like, I don't know, yeah, whether the individuals that wrote this article, whether they had to write it that way or whether, they're along for the ride. But, like... Oh yeah, just another oversight that they didn't record this specific guy's phone calls amidst everything else. I mean, it does make me think of people kind of discarded this one. People aren't as into this one anymore, but it was pretty big a couple.